What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we can finally put a bow on the prospect model series. We talked through running back, wide receivers, tight ends, my prospect model, how they work, my top 5 at each position. And today we talk about the quarterbacks. We have a lot to talk about. Anthony Richardson's kind of a hot topic right now, what I've changed with the model, all of that and more. So if you are interested in all of that, you want to learn a thing or two about the quarterbacks in this class, sit tight, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
Thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm critical. My nitty bag.
Now, I want to say two things before we get into this. First, I'm going to try, yell at me if I don't, but I'm going to try and put all the videos we did these last 2 weeks, right, where I go over the prospect models, my top 5s, in the same playlist as the one from last year. So if you're interested in how the model works, all of that, it's all in one spot. I know that like 90% of you guys aren't going to watch every single one of these, but I just want to have this stuff documented somewhere because, again, like I don't just want to throw my prospect model down your guys' faces and expect everyone to know what I'm talking about. So I like to have a spot where you guys can see, he keeps mentioning RS grades. What the hell are those? So on top of that, the RS grades in their entirety will be on Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. My tight ends, quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, the 2023 guys, the 2024, the 2025 guys for the Devies heads out there. You got every class back to 2007. My rookie rankings just went live a few days ago. If you have a rookie draft coming up or you just want to kind of see how I have my top 48, the link to the patreon.com/Ron Stewart will be down below in the description and in the comments. So let's get straight into this. All right, we've done this spiel. This will be like our 7th time now over the last year. But we have the RS grade. Stands for Ron Stewart grades. And essentially what it does is it takes a prospect's stats, draft capital, athleticism, and it gives you a grade on a scale of 0 through 10. And that output predicts a player's points per game over their first 3 seasons. Now, when we talk about quarterback, this is how the model breaks down. And I have literally every single percentage for you guys to see exactly what goes in to the model. And we see here, we have film at the top. And film really matters for quarterbacks. When I say film, it's draft capital and Lanzierli's film grades. Draft capital is absolutely everything at quarterback. If you don't get drafted in the top 12 picks, you might never start a game in the NFL. So draft capital matters a ton because it's a film grade where scouts are watching film. They got the projector, the all-22, but it also equates to playing time. The higher you're drafted, the more investment a team has in that player or that quarterback. The earlier he gets on the field, the longer leash he has, right? We've seen guys like Darnold, Mitch Trubisky have like 3 years to start at quarterback. Sadly, Zach Wilson only 2. He was that bad, but still he was given a 2-year audition. Now, we also have Lanzierline grades. This is just a third party for grading QBs, right? Much smaller input than draft capital. The NFL screws it up all the time, right? Zach Wilson was 2nd overall. Mahomes was 10th overall. Deshaun Watson was 12th overall. Jamarcus Russell was 1st overall. Russell Wilson was a 3rd-round pick. So if you just went strictly off of draft capital, it wouldn't be all that great. So I like having, 1/4 of what draft capital is weighted in Lanzierline's grades just to get a different perspective on what the NFL thinks because quarterback evaluation is so all over the place. Now, our next biggest input is advanced passing. It's a weird name for it. I wanted to call this passing production, but it's much more of an efficiency stat than it is a volume stat. It's not a counting stat, or most of the stats that I use for quarterbacks aren't counting stats. It's also important to note you won't see breakout age here. You won't see draft age. You won't see early declare. At quarterback, it really doesn't matter like the other positions, right? Where it's like breakout age and coming out early and being dominant. For quarterbacks in the NFL, or just quarterbacks in general, I don't think it's as important. Andrew Luck, Justin Herbert, Cam Newton, and Joe Burrow, I don't think that they started at quarterback for their first 3 years in college and they came out and were 2 of like the best fantasy quarterbacks we've ever seen. It's also important. I want to get out ahead of this. What we're looking for, like these RS grades in terms of passing and everything, these are not grades for NFL production and being, franchise quarterbacks. It's a different equation in terms of real life NFL quarterbacks versus fantasy football quarterbacks, guys who are going to score points for our fantasy teams. And when it comes to that, draft age and all that doesn't matter a ton. Now, our biggest input in advanced passing is OF plus, and it's Football Outsiders offensive rating. It's weighted at 12.5%. Essentially, it's just kind of like a strength of schedule sort of thing. How good is your offense relative to your opponents? Ideally, we want quarterbacks who drive the ship of high-powered offenses. It matters, right? So if a quarterback can sustain a good offense in college, he can probably do the same thing in the NFL. Then we have touchdown-interception ratio, which is pretty simple. We want players who throw TDs, limit their turnovers, right? What are you giving in terms of the positive, and what do you have to pay to get to that positive? That's really the biggest thing at quarterback is what is the trade-off? What do you bring, and what is the downside there? I also like to look at big-time throw to turnover-worthy play ratio, which is BTT TWP ratio, which is essentially the same thing, but it accounts for variance, right? So if you throw like a 5-yard dump off to a running back who then takes it 40 yards to the house, you're not getting the credit for that, whereas passing touchdowns give you the credit on that. And then you also have, if a quarterback gets a pass tipped and it's picked off, you're getting a big ding for that in touchdown interception ratio, but in big time throw to turnover with your play ratio, you're not getting that same ding there. So I like they both are evenly weighted here. Touchdown interception ratio is pretty simple. Big time throw to turnover with your play ratio just to account for any variance. Now, our last stat here is ESPN's QBR. We take the average, we take the peak. I have thresholds for it. What QBR is adjusted total quarterback rating by ESPN. It values the quarterback on all play types on a 0 to 100 scale, adjusted for the strength of opposing defenses faced. So I have thresholds for every age based on your QBR and based on quarterbacks with top 12 finishes. I take every quarterback in my database that has a top 12 finish. I find what the average QBR is in each and every single age, so age 9, 18, 19, 20, 21, all of that. And then I measure how far above and below a prospect gets in response to those thresholds. And then I take their career average and I take their best season. We want guys who either do it for a long time or have a really massive peak, like a Joe Burrow, like a Cam Newton, at the end of their career. Also, it's worth noting, I don't take in any counting stats or any passing stats or even rushing stats unless if the player had 100 or more pass attempts in that season. So you're not going to get dinged for not starting early in this model. Now, next up, we have rushing. And rushing matters a ton for fantasy. We want quarterbacks that can raise our ceiling. We want quarterbacks that, can be Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, all the guys at the top of the totem pole at quarterback. Even when you're talking about startups, were mobile in college, did rush in college. Now, I will say, you don't have to be a rushing quarterback to grade out well in the RS grades. A guy like Trevor Lawrence, a guy like Joe Burrow, guys who weren't, Lamar Jacksons have great grades. But I want to allow for a different pass. So you don't have to necessarily be a great passer to even grade out really well in the RS grades if you make up for it in the rushing department. So for rushing, the stats I use are pretty simple. The first one is market share of rushing yards over expected based on yearly thresholds, pretty much like QBR. Rushing quarterbacks are accounting for a bunch of their team's rushing yards, so it's just literally a quarterback's rushing yards divided by a team's rushing yards. How much of the rushing are you accounting for? Now, we have a new stat that I really, really like. It's just a 6% input, nothing too crazy. Rushing yard market share is 9.5%, so smaller than that, but it's called rush and sack EPA per play. Now, what the hell is EPA? It is expected points added, and this is a really, really good way that I believe the 33rd team pointed it out like this, but expected points added, commonly referred to as EPA, is a measure of how well a team performs relative to expectation. For example, if a team starts a drive on the 50-yard line, its expected points to start the drive would be about 2.5. If the team ends the drive with a field goal, thus gaining 3 points, its EPA for that drive would be found by subtracting its expected points from how many points it actually gained. So 3 minus 2.5 is 0.5 EPA. So the idea here is based on your field position, what are you expected to score, and what do you actually end up scoring? How much are you giving above what you're expected in the scoring department, which is absolutely massive for quarterbacks. Now, I then isolate it for just sacks and just rushes on a per play basis. So rushing EPA, to me, it's a nice supplement for rushing market share. We still care about rushing market share, but Are you, giving empty 100-yard rushing games in like 35 to 14 losses? Or is your rushing actually helping your EPA, helping your team score points, helping your team go above what they're expected, right? That is a way where a lot of, the old heads in this space will say, or not this space, but like fantasy on your like ESPN shows saying, Lamar Jackson's a running back. I want a pocket passer. Well, if Lamar Jackson isn't giving you empty rushing and his rushing is actually, affecting wins and losses through EPA, that's really meaningful. Even if it's not, the top line of his job description, rushing matters a ton, even more so in the modern NFL. Now, we also have on the other side sacks, right? So I isolate it for rushes and I isolate it for sacks. Where are you taking bad sacks, right? If you are negatively impacting EPA, you're taking sacks in high leverage situations. So you're taking them on, third and short, or you're taking them with, minutes counting down at the end of the half when you can't be taking sacks there, massive negative plays. Are you taking bad sacks? And it's also something we see a lot with scrambling quarterbacks. I think Justin Fields struggles with it. Russell Wilson struggles with it in the NFL. They'll hold the ball a lot longer than a pocket passer because they can, make people miss and make moves, and then they can just get downfield and rush. But that also gives you a lot of negative plays. So in a perfect world, what this does is we are isolating for 2 or 3 different things. We want rushing quarterbacks who aren't just rushing for empty yards. Are they affecting wins and losses? Because teams will value that. Our pocket quarterbacks, at least if they're not going to run the ball, are they limiting EPA lost on sacks? Are they, being smart with the football and not taking bad sacks? And then you have bonus points where if you are rushing and affecting wins and losses while also not taking bad sacks, because again, it's very common for scrambling quarterbacks to take a bunch of sacks, hold on to the ball longer. So you get bonus points if you're a quarterback that runs the ball a ton, adds EPA on the ground, but also doesn't lose that EPA that he gains on the ground by taking bad, boneheaded sacks. So when we look how this stat kind of fleshes out for us, I think it's pretty clean. Again, just a 6% input. It's not, a magic stat or anything, but I think it helps. This is, if we look at rush and sack EPA per play in each of these players' careers, right? So CAR is just career. Since 2015, first round picks since then, it's pretty good, right? It brings, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Marcus Mariota, Allen, Deshaun, Fields, Mahomes, all the way up to the top. It even puts, it's not a raw rushing stat because you have guys like Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow ahead of a guy like Daniel Jones who took a lot of bad sacks. And it brings guys like Goff, Haskins, Rosen, Darnold, Baker, Pickett, Paxton Lynch, Mac Jones, all the way on the bottom. So to me, it's good. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than just raw rushing. So I like it. Again, I also like that it brings up Trevor Lawrence and Burrow, despite them not being Konami code type QBs. Now, you'll see Konami code, mobile, statue. What the hell are those? Those are just rushing designations. Shout out again. We talked about them on yesterday's video, or him, Ian over at Dynasty_IM on Twitter. He sort of came up with the idea of bucketing these quarterbacks, and these are just based on their rushing market share and their rushing yards in college. Konami's the top one. Then it's mobile. Those guys are just like guys who can scramble, but you're not going to get like Lamar Jackson 1,000-yard rushing seasons from them. And then your statues. And the way that I see it, and I know some people have done like studies on this, quarterback rushing isn't so much an athleticism thing as it's a tendency thing. I think both are at play here, but you could have a guy run a 4.4 at the combine, and if he's a pocket passer, he's not going to all of a sudden just like take off because now he knows he's athletic because he tested well at the combine. If you look at side by side, I use this example all the time. Andrew Luck and Cam Newton, same dude on paper. 6'4", 235 pounds, runs a 4.65, 4.67, and Andrew Luck is much more of a mobile guy. He'll take off when he has to, and he'll scramble. Cam Newton, obviously, first year in the league, like I think 1,000 plus rushing yards and like maybe 10 plus rushing touchdowns. Just a different category than an Andrew Luck, and that's because of tendency. Now, athleticism still does matter though, and athleticism in the model is at 14% down there. Half is relative athletic score at 7%, which is just, on a scale from 0 to 10, size, explosion, agility, speed. Where do you rank there? And then also hand size. You guys will probably be a little bit surprised by hand size at 7%. Again, not a big input, but you'd be surprised how good hand size actually is for quarterbacks. Like, it's a pretty small input, but you have guys that sort of popped in hand size, maybe wouldn't have popped otherwise. Dak has massive hands. Russell Wilson, Josh Allen, Trevor Lawrence, Tua, Justin Herbert, Andrew Luck, Matthew Stafford all have 10 plus inch hands. Like 10 plus is like pretty much your A plus hand size grade. Doesn't penalize you for having small hands. I think Burrow has like smaller hands than you would think. Doesn't really penalize you unless you have like freakishly small hands, like sub 9 inches, like a Kenny Pickett. But ideally, like I think hand size and having big hands also equates to like, arm strength and all of that. So it's just one input. It's nothing too crazy. Now, these categories, right, that we're seeing here, film, advanced passing, rushing, athleticism, all get graded on a 10-point scale. And then we get a weighted average that gives us essentially a GPA for these players that gives us our RS grades. And when we look at a sample, this is our quarterbacks, I believe I'm trying to think, I believe these are from 2018 to 2022. So the last, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So the last 5 draft classes here sorted by RS grade. Again, cannot stress this enough. These are based on fantasy scoring. That's why Kyler Murray is ahead of a Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence. They're all 10, but I cap them off at 10. They're raw RS grades. Kyler Murray is at the top. And this is how the tiers break up here, right? So you have the RS grades, top to bottom, and then based on those RS grades, you get put into tiers. Legendary, elite, gold, silver, bronze. Legendary are guys with 10 or better RS grades. They hit top 12 quarterback seasons or top 12 point per game seasons 100% of the time. They average 21 points per game through their first 3 seasons. Then we have the elite guys, which are, your very solid quarterback prospects. 90% of the time they're hitting top 12 seasons. 19.92 points per game through 3 seasons is also very, very good. Then you have gold, which are kind of like your hit or miss type of guys. You'll have some second round guys like Jalen Hurts sneak in there, Mac Jones, Darnold, Daniel Jones. It's not a death sentence, but it's not great. 13.8 points per game, 50% of the time they'll hit top 12 seasons. And then you have silver, 37.5% of the time they'll hit top 12 seasons, 12.31 points per game through 3 seasons. So really not that far off of gold. And then bronze is just a wasteland. These are guys who aren't really going to see the field. 3% of the time they'll hit top 12 seasons and just a 3.4 points per game through the first 3 years. Now, it's also important to note it is much more important to focus on the tiers than it is the RS grades. When we look at just this raw ranking here, okay, it looks good, right? Kyler, Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields. And then you have Tua, Baker, Zach Wilson over Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, and Josh Allen. And Jalen Hurts. That's not great, but as I always say, like if this ranking was to be literally just a clean, this is the best quarterbacks in the NFL, you'd be running into a lot of overfitting issues in your model where if it's completely 100% perfect, then you're kind of retroactively changing things and all of that, which is really tough to do. That's why I think that we should really just stick to bucketing things, right? That's why it just matters elite, legendary, gold, and then make your choices within each tier, right? We could have saw Lamar Jackson's Konami code, Josh Allen's Konami code, Baker is mobile. Maybe in that 2018 draft class, we should have preferred a Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson over Baker. But even then, that's still a lot of hindsight bias here. Now, this is all good. This is pretty. It looks pretty on the screen. I feel pretty good about these grades as well. Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, Matt Corral from last year, Jordan Love, all in silver. Kenny Pickett actually really, really low down there. But I think they look really good. So the issue here is, as we always say, you have to beat draft capital for a model to be useful. Does it beat draft capital? It does. I will say draft capital is very, very strong for quarterbacks, though, because it affects playing time so much. 0.461 R squared in terms of draft pick versus year 1 to 3 points per game is really, really strong. The model we'll see on the left-hand side here, quarterback RS grade versus year 1 to 3 points per game, 0.631 R squared. So a pretty good improvement there. What's that, like a 0.15 type improvement there? It's better just because, like, in the NFL, we talked about it, but, like, you could be the first overall pick and suck. Like, I think that like, if you look all the way draft pick, like, 0, so we're talking, like, first overall pick, that guy who has, like, 6 points per game, I want to say that's Jamarcus Russell. So there's a little bit more nuance there. You can just use draft capital for this stuff, but RS grades, I think, give you a little bit more nuance here. So with that being said, I isolate those 4 categories of production, advanced passing, rushing, athleticism, and that is going to spit us out our rookie comps for the top 5 quarterbacks in this class. So my quarterback one as of today and you guys are not going to be happy about this at all, is Anthony Richardson. He is my quarterback one. I would call it QB1A. I cannot stress this enough, fellas. Him, Stroud, Bryce Young are all in the same tier for me. And if you look at my Dynasty rankings, they are all going to be back-to-back-to-back in the mid-second round of startups. Literally, once you get past, your, Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, probably like CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown, maybe Kyle Pitts is in there. And then it's just going to be these three quarterbacks rapid fire. You can put them in any order you feel like. To me, they are the top three for me right now. To be honest with you guys, this is the order I have as of today when I'm filming this video. I might flip-flop 12 times between now and the NFL draft. I think it is razor thin between these top three. Now, these top three guys all grade out, and we'll get back to these comps in a second, but these top three QBs all grade out as elite quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson is Konami, CJ Stroud is statue, Bryce Young is statue. So when it comes down to this for me, as we saw with the RS grades, it really just matters about the tiers. It's not so much, RS grade versus RS grade. And when we're looking at, Baker as a mobile guy versus, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson as Konami code guys, the bet's probably a little bit lower floor, but the payoff is way, way bigger. And when we just look at, here, and you just look at the elite prospects, like you can look through mobile. If you look through mobile and statue, the only guy you're really happy with is Justin Herbert, maybe Tua. And then Konami code is literally just studs across the board. I guess Mariota is kind of a bust. I guess Griffin is kind of a bust, but Justin Fields, Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, Trey Lance, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and that's filtered by RS grade. Anthony Richardson has the highest RS grade than Trey Lance, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes in my database. So it's kind of tough to wrestle with. You also see Tua had a higher RS grade than CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. So for me, give me the Konami guys over the statue mobile guys every single time. Stroud and Young, they're not going to add a ton on the ground, so you need a lot of passing efficiency to make up for that. You need, like a 40-plus passing touchdown season to crack the top 5. Anthony Richardson could pass for less than 20 passing touchdowns and still give you a top 5 season. He's that good, similar to what Justin Fields just did. Now, there is for sure, when we talk about Anthony Richardson, a ton of downside here. This is not a lock by any means. The ceiling is crazy, right? With that A+ athleticism, A+ rushing, we absolutely love that. But B- in passing puts him in a tier where, or a comps list where he's somewhere between Mahomes, Lance, Lamar, who are at A- in their advanced passing. So he's not the same passer as those guys. And it puts his floor at Jake Locker and Daniel Jones. I think it's dangerous to cling on to Josh Allen as a comp, who's sort of a little bit of an outlier. You can't just cling on to, he went highly, didn't pass well, could rush in athleticism. Like, Richardson will also be great, because you could say the same thing about a guy like Jake Locker, who went 8th overall, A+ rushing, A+ athleticism, and did absolutely nothing in the NFL. So I will say Daniel Jones isn't great. He still racked up 2 top 12 finishes. I think that's sort of what Anthony Richardson is looking at here. Or I think worst case scenario, he'll give you at least a quarterback one season. He'll give you production. He'll give you ample, selling windows where he looks really good early on, and we'll kind of look at his peripherals, his passing grades, all of that, and we can kind of decide then. But I want to bet on that rushing upside when looking at him versus the other quarterbacks. Now, when we look at that C+ or that B- advanced passing, it wasn't great. His QBR was below my age 21 threshold this year. He had a 1.9 TD to interception ratio, which isn't great. 19 big-time throws to 13 turnover-worthy plays isn't great. We like to see like 2+ ratio there. It puts him in like that B- range as a passer, which isn't great. But I do think there are some positives to hold on to. First being that this was just his first full season starting at quarterback in the SEC. Wasn't really passing to anybody. I don't think that Florida has any draft prospects this year. I think that he was sort of just out there by himself. I know Travis Etienne's little brother was their running back, but outside of that, I don't think there's anything really going on there. So he's not going to be like a super polished product. But for being someone that's so raw, his pocket presence and his pocket poise in terms of the numbers is really, really impressive. He really pops in that rush and sack EPA per play stat that I added this year. He doesn't take bad sacks, and he actually helps his team win games by rushing on the ground. If we look at this is the career rush and sack EPA per play. He is right in the mix behind just Kyler, Lamar, Marcus Mariota. He's ahead of Allen. He's ahead of Fields. He's ahead of Deshaun Watson. He's really good. You see Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis. They're not in the Josh Rosen, Dwayne Haskins, Jared Goff danger zone. But they're not where Richardson is either. And if we even just isolate it down to just EPA lost on sacks, this is where it gets really interesting, man. Sack EPA per play, he takes better sacks than Bryce Young. He only lost minus 7.1 EPA this year on sacks. When you look at a guy like Will Levis, he took minus 23.4 this year, minus 13.1 the year before that. So for a guy that's so raw, he's not as raw as Will Levis, where Will Levis is making really, really negative plays in the pocket. Anthony Richardson, for as much as he's giving you on the ground, he's at least not, being a liability in the pocket, taking really, really bad sacks, making boneheaded plays. And that's a really strong positive for him. I also want to note Malik Willis, who a lot of people are saying like, oh, Anthony Richardson's just Malik Willis. I think that's dumb at this point. Malik Willis had minus 14.1 and minus 29.5 EPA lost on sacks in his final 2 years. Again, Anthony Richardson here in year 3, just minus 7.1. Also, shout out CJ Stroud. He does not take bad sacks at all. Maybe a slight red flag with Bryce Young, but he did improve on that in year 3. So you add in all of this. Richardson doesn't take bad sacks. He has room to develop as a passer. He only has 1 year as a starting quarterback in college. I think that he has plenty of room to improve. And he's actually helping game outcomes, wins and losses, EPA with his legs. And then you add the fact that he's going to be a lock to be a top 10 pick. He has all the athleticism in the world. He's a special rusher. He's 6'4", 244 pounds, which is massive in this NFL, where we're seeing Lamar Jackson get hurt, Kyler Murray get hurt, all these guys who run the ball a ton but are sub, 210 pounds. This is a big, big boy who runs the ball, and I think that I think he's a favorite. Like, I don't think I would put the odds at probably minus 150 that he has a top 12 point per game season in the NFL. So I'll just bet on that. I think the sky's the limit. He could easily be a top 5 startup pick like Jalen Hurts is by the time he's in like year 3. We'll see. Again, the floor is low there, but I think there's going to be enough value insulation where he's going to be a young quarterback a lot of people like. He's going to go top 10 in the NFL draft. There's going to be a lot of leeway there in terms of insulation, I think, especially in year 1. After that, we have Bryce Young at QB2. Now, I can't stress enough, Young and Stroud are amazing prospects. They are very, very good prospects, okay? They are, again, in the same tier as Richardson. For fantasy purposes, give me the guy with game-breaking upside on Richardson. But if I was on the clock at 101, if I was the Panthers and I had to make a pick for the NFL draft and bet my franchise on this player, I'm taking Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. So don't get that twisted. I don't have Anthony Richardson as my 101 if I was in the NFL draft, but for fantasy purposes, I'll take Richardson first. But I would have Young as probably like my 1B right now. He is really clean. Now, I think that he has a little bit more rushing upside than CJ Stroud, but it is tricky to gauge with college quarterbacks because rushing stats in college are affected by sacks, which is weird. But I did find PFF doesn't penalize you for taking sacks in the rushing department, which is really nice. So I think that I actually want to look at that a little bit further next offseason. They have rushing stats without getting affected by sacks, which I think is really nice. So what I did is I took their rushing stats from PFF in their final season, and I found their rushing points per game. How many points per game are they adding on the ground? And then I overlaid them over this past year's rushers. Now, of course, these are not going to hold up. They're going to get to the NFL. I don't believe that Anthony Richardson is going to lead the league in rushing points per game. It's just a way to get a feel. It would be better if I used final rush points per game in college. And again, we're going to have that stat compiled next year. I think this is going to be a fun thing to look at next offseason. This was just like me writing the outline today, had an idea, and this is what it looks like. So obviously, Richardson's not going to come up at the top, but I think it is fair to say from a rushing standpoint, he's going to fit right in there with like Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, top of the totem pole, 7+ rushing points per game. I think that is a safe bet to make. Now, it is also interesting to me, Bryce Young grades out a statue when you take in his rushing yard market share. When you look at just his rushing on PFF, he had 311 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns, which is pretty solid in a 12-game sample. And that puts him at 4.59 points per game, right in the mix with that next tier. Now, I don't think he's going to compete with Josh Allen or Mariota or Kyler, but I think it's pretty reasonable that he won't be a complete statue in that that bottoming Kirk Cousins, Jimmy Garoppolo area. I think that he has a chance to be in that Mahomes 3.22, probably all the way down to like Geno's 2.04. This is probably where I bet Bryce Young falls, but that's more mobile than statue designation is leading on, which is really, really promising. Now, when we flash back to the comps we had pulled up here, it's really tough to find comps for Bryce Young. Quarterbacks are already a pretty damn small sample. It's the size, right? He's 5'10 and a half. I think Burrow and Trevor Lawrence are actually pretty damn good comps for him, right? Where Bryce Young, A film, I think he'd have A+ film if he went first overall, and A+ advanced passing. He looks really good. I guess Tua would be a decent comp for him, but I think Tua's less of an athlete than Bryce Young, you know what I mean? So it's really tough. I do truly believe that he was like 6'6" Trevor Lawrence type, or even like Joe Burrow, just like above 6 foot. I think that he would qualify for legendary and be that tier of prospect. So he's very, very good. The size thing, I think, is overblown. I already have it bumping him from legendary to elite, essentially. And the idea that he's like too small and can't pan out, I think is kind of foolish here. When we look at the new age NFL, they're doing everything they can to protect quarterbacks. And sure, he's short. Oh, of course he's short. But when we look at the Alabama offensive line, his I looked at his 5 offensive linemen that led the team in snaps. His 2 tackles were 6'5" and 6'6". His guards were both 6'4". His center was 6'3". None of the guys on the line were undersized. He was fine. I truly do believe that it's not going to hurt him that much in the NFL, aside from maybe injuries. But he's a statue instead of like a Konami guy. He's not going to run as much as a Kyler Murray and put his body on the line like that. So I found, I just like pretty much looked at the lightest quarterbacks in my database, right? Bryce Young, 204 pounds at 5'10 and some change. Russell Wilson, 204 pounds at 5'10 and some change. Kyler Murray, 207 pounds at 5'10 and some change. I really don't care about it that much outside of, again, just limiting him from being legendary to just an elite quarterback. So I think that's kind of bogus. I even took the time out to chart it as well. You take points per game in years 1 through 3, and you chart it against weight. These are quarterbacks drafted rounds 1 through 3, 2007 to 2020. There is no correlation there. 0.004 correlation between weight and fantasy points per game. And you can even see those guys that are like sub 220, sub 210. That's Russell Wilson. That's Kyler Murray. Anybody out there that's telling you he's 204 pounds and that's going to stop him from scoring fantasy points, I don't know what to say. So he's quarterback like 1B for me. Honestly, after doing this research today and seeing that he has more rushing upside than I previously thought, I almost wanted to put him at quarterback 1. He's quarterback 1B for me, okay? It's very, very close between Anthony Richardson and him. Comes down to where they get drafted, what their landing spot is, all of that. Now, our QB3 is CJ Stroud here. And this is even a guy, you could talk me into taking CJ Stroud first overall if I was the Panthers. Again, this is just fantasy. And this is where it gets tough, right? He should be a good quarterback. He has A+ advanced passing, A+ film. He looks very, very strong. Right now, he's projected to go first overall. He's at the bottom there. I don't know why I didn't highlight it. But the comps are tough, right? He starts to look like Jared Goff and Tua and like Sam Bradford and Jameis Winston. It's not very pretty. I think, to be honest, my closest comp for him would be Tua without the injury history, which is nice. The ceiling isn't all that high. That's really the main issue for him, is just the rushing isn't great, right? C+ rushing is at least better than Jared Goff. It's worse than Jameis, worse than Tua, better than Bradford, worse than Zach Wilson. So there's no one with exactly C+ rushing on this list, but it's tough, right? The rushing ceiling isn't all that high. Now, I think the other slight red flag is that he had tons of studs to throw to in his entire career. He has Emeka Egbuka, he has Marvin Harrison Jr., he has JSN, he, of course, has Garrett Wilson, he, of course, had Chris Olave. He, of course, had Jeremy Ruckert. I believe he also, I already said Jeremy Ruckert, Jamison Williams. Nothing but weapons to throw to. I know Bean Counter right now, at Bulletproof Bean Counter or something like that on Twitter, he's been messing around with a stat where he takes into account a supporting cast for quarterbacks. And he's actually found that quarterbacks that have, a ton of NFL producers on their team usually do worse. I'm trying to think of the example he had. I think Mark Sanchez was one where Mark Sanchez had a bunch of USC studs that I can't think of right now. But there is at least, I guess, like some merit to that. But I'm not all that concerned. Now, he did have 70 rushing yards versus Georgia, which is not including his stats. He showed his rushing upside a little bit there, but I doubt he really gives us anything meaningful, right? We looked at the chart from before, where if we look at all of the rushing quarterbacks, CJ Stroud falls down into, Mike White, Jimmy Garoppolo, Kirk Cousins, hobbled Ryan Tannehill, old Dak Prescott. That's where he's fallen in there. He's not going to give you anything too great in terms of rushing, which is my biggest concern when it comes to fantasy for him. I don't think that he'll ever be able to, threaten for like 20 plus point per game upside without threading the needle of monster passing production, right? Like almost like damn near like MVP conversation type stuff to get into that area. So that's what's tough for him. Thankfully, he is an elite passer, right? He had back-to-back 40-plus touchdown season as a passer, A-plus grades in QBR, touchdown interception ratio. He also has literally the best age 19 QBR in my entire database, along with 85 touchdowns and 12 interceptions in 2 years as a starter. I think that he probably has the highest floor in this class. That's not really what I shoot for in fantasy. It wouldn't shock me at all as well if he came in and on day one he was a almost elite level passer like Joe Burrow was, like Justin Herbert was. It wouldn't shock me at all. So if he comes in right away as like the most pro ready and looks really good, it wouldn't shock me. Again, I have him in the same tier as the other two. I know that it looks like, oh man, CJ Stroud is low for QB3. I promise to you guys, however my rankings shake out in my like Dynasty top 250 rankings, they will be back to back to back in my startup rankings and probably flip-flopped 3 or 4 more times before the draft. Now, we have a big tier break down to Will Levis, who's actually really interesting. Now, I want to get out ahead. Right off the bat, his statute designation is inaccurate. He is really weird. He has like 2 seasons as a true starter in college. He had one where he was pretty good. Like, this was 2 years ago, right? So you have the one from this past season and then two seasons ago where he had 516 rushing yards on the ground with 9 rushing touchdowns. That's amazing. And then he came out this past year and had just 119 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Apparently he was dealing with a bunch of injuries, like a foot injury and a shoulder and a finger. So conservatively, I'm going to call him mobile at this point. Statue, again, his rushing from this year where he was kind of injured hurts his designation. I will be treating him as mobile. He has an A- rushing grade, which is pretty promising. And you could, I think the reason to get in on Will Levis is, even though Richardson's my QB1, I think you could make the case that Levis is probably a better like cost-effective value and bet than Anthony Richardson, right? They're both C-plus passers. We see here with Levis, C-plus passer. With both of them, you're betting on draft capital, you're betting on development, you're betting on tools and rushing upside and athleticism. Levis is still that Josh Allen type moonshot in the same way that Anthony Richardson's kind of that same moonshot, but he's more of an athlete to the point where he could have like Lamar Jackson, like Justin Fields, like special rushing upside. But Will Levis could be Josh Allen, even like early career Carson Wentz is a good comp. But then you have on the lower end like Christian Ponder and Blaine Gabbert. The floor could 100% fall out beneath him, and he could suck. There's clear risk here, but startup drafts, literally the top like 18 picks, like 12 of them are quarterbacks. Quarterbacks have the most upside to gain value in Dynasty, and we have a guy like Will Levis who has these tools: A- rushing, A+ athleticism. He's pretty much a lock to go in the top 10 in the NFL draft. I'll bet on that every single time. And he looks good as an athlete too. He's not the same athlete as Anthony Richardson, but when you take into account his physicals, he didn't run a 40, but his best comparable player on RAS's website is Andrew Luck, right? They're both about 6'4", 230 pounds. Will Levis, I think a really nice positive for him for not running a 40. Really explosive. 34-inch vertical and 10-foot broad jump is really, really strong. He also has massive, massive hands. If you look in the top left corner, his hands are 10.625 inches. That's bigger. That's a whole, 625, I think is like a whole, not 6/8, maybe 7/8, or maybe it's, I don't know, dude. I think it's a whole 5/8 bigger than Andrew Luck's hands. 10.625-inch hands. Absolutely huge. So he is a big, Josh Allen, Andrew Luck type, big boy. He runs the ball. He's going to get draft capital. He's a much stronger rusher than statue suggests. Now, this is where we get into the downsides here, where the passing with him is bad. Bottom percentile QBR, bottom percentile TD interception ratio, big time throw to turnover worthy play ratio. And he also, unlike Anthony Richardson, is not good at avoiding negative sacks and negative plays in the sack department. He is right here right? He is right smack dab between like EJ Manuel, Jamarcus Russell, Christian Ponder, Daniel Jones, Kenny Pickett, Zach Wilson, in taking really, really bad sacks. So that's a clear red flag. I think there's clear red flags all across the board for Will Levis, but that's sort of priced in. You're getting him at what, like 107-ish area in rookie drafts, so it's priced in. QB is so random. I could see him being Josh Allen. I could see him being Justin Herbert, where no one thought these guys were going to be good, and he has the tools to just come out here and be good. It seems like he's kind of consensus QB4 right now, so maybe he falls in the draft to a better slot than a guy. Panthers are up top, Texans are up top. Maybe he goes to a better landing spot there. I'm trying to think through, like maybe a team that's like trying to contend or something, or a team that has a quarterback in place but wants a next option. Like maybe the Vikings with Kirk Cousins. Maybe they decide to hop up and take a Will Levis. So there's a lot of sort of outs for this bet. He's a lock to go top 10 essentially. He has all the tools in the world. I honestly kind of love him where he's going in rookie drafts. As much as I don't like Will Levis, at his prices, I'll take that all day long. Will Levis would have been minimum. He would have been QB1 in last year's class. And you probably maybe would have seen him get picked. Like if Will Levis went like, let's say 3rd overall last year, I think you could have made the case that he could have gone like right after Bryce Hall. Something in that area. Now, after that, we have Hendon Hooker. I don't know how true that last statement was. I think I'm kind of talking my ass there. But we have Hendon Hooker. And he's exciting. He looks like a lot of these non-first round gems in my database where none of these guys are elite prospects, but for where they got drafted, right? Russell Wilson in the 3rd round, Dak on day 3. They ended up flashing a little bit in the RS grades, going up, Colin Kaepernick in gold, Dak Prescott in silver. They popped a little bit, right? So you have Russ, Dak, Jalen Hurts, Colin Kaepernick. Now, Hendon Hooker's interesting because he's an A-plus rusher. He didn't test because he's hurt, but he's a much better passer than Levis and Richardson with that A advanced passing score. So he looks a lot like these gems you take stabs on later. Now, here's the tough part with him. He's coming off a late season ACL tear, and he's 25 years old. So that is pretty tough. He won't be on the field until like late year 1 in the absolute earliest. But I will say, we said this earlier, age isn't an input in the model. I don't care about your draft age or your early declare status, your breakout age. Quarterback position is the position where it matters the least. Now, I will say, for those stats where I'm taking like year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, I only count age 18 to 23 in year 1 through 6. So a guy like Brandon Weeden, I threw out all of his stats that came after age 23, after year 6. Same thing with Hendon Hooker. His stats, his 24-year-old stats for, QBR and all of that are thrown out. Anything after age 23, anything after year 6, it's all thrown out. So that's factored into the silver grade and that A passing, and he still grades out very, very well. And there's a lot to like here. He had his best season, 17 big-time throws to 5 turnover-worthy plays this past season. That's a great number. That's a 3+ ratio. That's better than Richardson and Levis. He has 80 career passing touchdowns to 12 interceptions. That's elite. That's like literally what, obviously it's over like 5 seasons instead of 2 for CJ Stroud, but in terms of like taking care of the football and scoring touchdowns, that's a similar like career touchdown interception ratio with 80+ touchdowns as a guy like CJ Stroud. Now, he didn't test due to injury, right? He has that torn ACL, but he comes out here with huge 10.5-inch hands, which gives him a slight boost in the athleticism category when he needs it because he's not going to give you an RAS score. So he has the same hand size as Anthony Richardson. He has bigger dudes than guys who have mitts like Josh Allen and Justin Herbert, which again, as we highlighted earlier, just 7% of the inputs, but for a guy that needs a boost in the athleticism department, that's pretty huge. And then, of course, he's a great rusher. He qualifies as Konami code. He had 566 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns this past season. His previous 2 seasons, he had 7+ rushing in each of those years. So there's a lot to like here. Good passer, good rusher. He's just old and coming off injury, but again, old doesn't really matter. So I'm kind of interested in whatever the discount is, whether it's like late second in rookie drafts or 3rd round in rookie drafts. I'm very much a fan of Hendon Hooker. I think that he will be a target for me. It seems like he has some buzz to even go late 1st round. It wouldn't shock me at all if we saw kind of like the Teddy Bridgewater, Lamar Jackson trade where a team like trades up to like 31st or 30th. Like now we don't have a 32nd pick and goes out there and takes a Hendon Hooker. Now, that is it for today. Those are my top 5 quarterbacks, how I got to this point, how the prospect model works. Again, almost 45 minutes on the dot. I appreciate you for sticking around this long. As always, if you want to see how these RS grades are going to change throughout the offseason, right? As we get more news, I think Lance Zierlein grades are changing as we get some pro day stuff. Maybe a guy like Will Levis runs a 40. A lot of stuff is changing. Draft capital is changing. So make sure you check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart. There'll be a link down below in the description. There'll be a link down below in the comments section if you want access to my RS grades for 2023. Those are constantly updating. You have my RS grade dating back to 2007. You have my rookie rankings I just put out on there, my top 48 Superflex tight end premium. I'm going to get Dynasty rankings done in the next couple of weeks. We have a lot of stuff going on there, a lot of exciting stuff going on there. So make sure you check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart. And if not, a like, a subscribe means the world to me. We are out here in March. If you are out here watching my videos in March, I love you for that. I'm not out here watching my videos in March. I'm just making them. So I appreciate that. I love you guys, and I will see y'all in the next one.
I got the juice, I got the juice.
Channel, Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper, song, singer, suspended, subpoena from misdemeanors.